Hello, this is Pastor Christopher Morundi of the Lutheran Institute of Regenerative Agriculture, and I'm very glad to be bringing you another webinar. We've had a number of them so far this year. We've got quite a few more scheduled. I kind of keep getting more and more on the schedule. I'm always looking for more to bring on. So if you happen to know someone who'd be a fascinating voice for us to hear on this webinar series, just let us know. I'm very glad today to have Vance McCoy. Vance is the owner of Triple Creek Cover Crops in Elsie, Nebraska, another Southwest Nebraska farmer that we're bringing out here. So that's good to double them up back to back here. And Vance and I will both be speaking this summer. I think him and I are actually maybe even back to back at the Graze Master Conference in Seward, Nebraska. Actually, I think you and I are speaking maybe out on the farm, so out by Pleasantdale, if I'm remembering right. So we'll be both be out there for that event. I put that on Facebook page. Certainly encourage you to come out and take that in. Thank you so much, Vance, for being a part of our webinar series.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Vance, let's start out by letting the group kind of know a little bit about you. Yeah, as I said before, Triple Creek Cover Crops, and we're going to talk in much more detail about the specifics and the details of that aspect of cover crops and that sort of thing later on, probably in our second webinar. But for right now, just kind of introduce yourself. Who are you? How did you get into this whole thing? And what's been your path to get you where you are right now?
Okay, so I'm from Elsie, Nebraska. It's clear down the southwest corner, and was born and raised here. I'm fifth generation. My great great grandfather on the McCoy side homesteaded here, and so I've kind of farmed my whole life. And then, um, oh, my dad was pretty conservative as far as conserving. We were on a really sandy land, and we were planting cover crops before we knew what cover crops were, just from necessity. So I've had people ask me how long you've been doing cover crops, and it's been a long, long time. But anyway, um, so my wife and I farm together. She's a registered nurse in town, and then we have three grown children, two sons that farm, and then a daughter who works at an eye clinic. And we have four grandchildren and another one on the way. And but yeah, I got into regenerative farming, some just from wanting to do more regenerative and thinking about human health and our own the health of the soil and all that, but some just through necessity, just trying to find ways to do more with less. And also scaling back the size of my operation because my two sons came back and were farming with me, and we expanded and got pretty big. But then I wanted to have separate operations. I've just seen these family deals where dad controls everything, and the kids never learn on their own, and they get frustrated, and lots of family strife. So I always wanted them to have their own separate operations, and so after a few years, we all separated them, and now again, necessity. I need to scale back a little bit and be able to do more with less land. So.
Who are your kind of when you started? You said you got into regenerative both of necessity and then also the land stewardship. We'll talk about kind of both of them as we go through here. Who are kind of the leading lights? I've been meaning to ask people this. I'm kind of curious. Who are the ones that you were reading when you first started getting into this gig?
So one of my first experiences, I had already switched to no-till. Same deal. It was either buy a whole new line of equipment or buy a no-till drill and start no-tilling, because most of my tillage equipment was shot and we were just needing to make a change. So I was no-tilling, and part of that was I got hired to do a no-till planting job for a guy, and I just noticed his ground was just mellow and it's just different. One day he got like 3.5 inches of rain, and I said, "Well, when do you think we'll be back down there to plant?" He said, "By afternoon if the sun comes out." And I thought, no way. And sure enough, that afternoon, I mean, his ground was wet, but you could stay on top and you weren't making tracks. And it was just like, there's something different here. And so I started quizzing him about it. Plus, I knew what he was putting on for fertilizer, and it was very little. And I knew what he was raising for crops, and it was really good. So I started quizzing him, and so he introduced me to Gabe Brown. You know, he said, "Oh, we got to go see Gabe Brown's ranch," which we still haven't done. But anyway, and then he invited me to go to No Till on the Plains, and so I started seeing some of these guys like Jimmy Emmons and I think let's see who else. But the one that convinced me was one that people really haven't heard much of. He was a farmer from Southwest Kansas, and he was talking about how dry it is there and how he can benefit from cover crops. And because a lot of times, even though they're dry there, they still have too much moisture in the spring, a lot of times, April, May time frame, and that you can take advantage of that. And I'm like, well, that's the same where we're at. It's just always too wet in the spring almost. And then it dries up and you don't have any. So I started implementing that a little bit. But yeah, so I just started watching YouTube videos of whoever I could. Another big influence is Nicole Masters is really good. But yeah, there's just a ton of them. And I've gone to some seminars, and what I always end up enjoying is the local farmers who are telling their story. And that's kind of what inspired me, I guess, to start telling mine. So I think we talked
Wonderful.
about before recording that I post a lot on Facebook, and that's just me trying to share kind of what I'm learning, I guess.
And that's been kind of the fun thing about, obviously not YouTube and Facebook. They're obvious, it's not all positive, but that's been the positive thing in this space, is that there's so many connections you can make and so many ways to share stories and learn, and get all that information just right there at your fingertips. Actually see it, which is a little bit different than reading a book. To actually have someone walk you around in their operation, one aspect or all aspects, is really a cool thing. You mentioned two reasons to get that you got into this, and let's kind of explore each of them in turn. So you mentioned uh the healthy people, the kind of producing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, nutrient dense food. Maybe that's not what you had said, but like the health of people was kind of the first aspect, and I think that's kind of tied into the health of the land itself. Talk about that. How how do you view yourself as a steward of the land, and then also a steward of what people are putting into their bodies that you're producing for them?
Yeah. So as far as the human health, I think it's got two aspects. It's the food that we're feeding to people, but then it's also the environment we're putting ourselves in. And as I look at having grandkids around, I don't, I grew up mixing atrazine with my arm in the tank, and spraying it on when I was 12. I don't want my grandkids to grow up like that. So that's the human health side of things. And then, but the stewardship part, I guess, as a Christian, um, I feel like sometimes we have a little bit messed up understanding what stewardship is. It's not making the most money for me. It, I think when you look at the parable of the talents, where he wanted just sustainability isn't good enough. The guy that just kept everything the same was rebuked. He was looking for somebody who was going to improve on what you give him. And the whole idea is too that we don't own anything, that God owns everything. And we're, as stewards, we're just managers who are supposed to take that and make it better. And sometimes that is, yes, to make more money, but it's also to improve everything that he's given us, the land, our families, the whole situation, and our communities. All of that, I think, enters into stewardship. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to turn it into something selfish, that we just need to make something more for ourselves or our heirs, when really just taking what God gives us and trying to make an increase.
Yeah, I've been pondering a lot the aspect of agriculture, which is serving your neighbor. And certainly serving your neighbor can be serving a neighbor who lives several hundred miles away, or even across the world, and that's certainly important too. But there's also this aspect of serving the neighbor that the Lord has put right in front of you, which includes starting first off with your own family, and then those who are the next circles out, close to you. How do you see the interaction of agriculture and how we do agriculture and rural community? What are some of the things that you see and observe and reflect upon with that?
Well, I guess so. Some of my experiences growing up, my dad was had got diagnosed with lung cancer when I was like 15, and all the neighbors pitched in and helped harvest the corn. And that's the kind of community we have, and that still happens to a degree around here, but it's to be more than the rest of the time we're kind of all competing. And I've seen kind of a change in that um, I don't know that we've just been kind of conditioned into that. I think that we need to get bigger. Our operations need to get bigger, and we have to compete with our neighbor. And that's some of the regenerative thing, is being able to do more with less, and maybe have time or have the ability to help the neighbors out.
You mentioned, and that kind of ties into the second reason you gave for moving into regenerative agriculture, was that you do more with less. Okay, with a few examples, or just kind of unpack what that means, how that looks, this idea of using more with less, and that actually kind of gives you an opportunity to kind of define how you understand regenerative agriculture.
Well, I guess so. The model, the first probably 20 years I farmed, we just corn. I mean, that's just what we did. And, you know, yields got higher and higher and higher. And it just requires more equipment and more help to harvest that and get it. And so some of what I've done now that I don't have all the help is, I'll plant, well, my background there is behind me is buckwheat. And, you know, if that's a really good crop, it'll make, a couple thousand pounds per acre. So, versus corn that 10, 15, 20,000 pounds per acre. And, um, so it's just lower inputs, um, lower expected yields, but, the revenue is there to, for some of these more higher value feed crops.
And how do
And then
you?
the,
Oh, sorry.
and then the rotation aspect of it, it gives me a chance to spread out my harvest, um, be able to do some of the harvesting by myself, and not have to require so much labor.
And how then do you, um you talk about buckwheat back, how do you really, I mean, we're in a part of the country where the market's right there. I mean, just get to the grain elevator for corn or for soybeans. How do you market and get some of these quote unquote alternatives, or less used, less planted crops? How do you find a place to get them when you're done growing them?
For me right now, it's the cover crop seed. I I I started out just as an experiment. I mean, I was using some, and like, just finding out what some of the stuff costs. It's like, well, I can raise that, but then finding a market, all of a sudden you need a market, because if I planted my whole farm to, say, hairy vetch, I could flood the market. So there is a bit of a limited market, but for me, it's the cover crop seed. And so a lot of that I'm wholesaling to a larger cover crop company than mine. And that's my market right now. Um, yeah, the old commodity, I mean, around here it's corn, soybeans, wheat. You haul it all to the elevator, and there weren't really markets anything else. There's a little bit of popcorn and edible beans grown out here, but mostly it's just corn and soybeans. And so, yeah, finding a market is probably should be the first step. Um, but I didn't do it that way.
Well, but that to me is one of the things that at least here in the first wave or the first generation or so, when you're trying to do something different, you do have to be a little innovative because you don't have that just ready made. I'll just put it in a truck and haul it in. You need to be your own marketer, or you need to be creative in finding the market, which is tough. I mean, that takes a little bit of extra work, and it reminds me too of, when you those who do farm to table livestock operations, they're doing all the marketing themselves, and it's very different than just than taking your animals to a slaughterhouse or to a buying station. um so that's a challenge. What's the reward though, in putting in that work to kind of develop your own market?
Well, um, it's rewarding for me to just have different things to try. Just uh, it's just amazing to walk through a field of something you've never grown before and just observe. I mean, like the buckwheat behind there was just loaded with bees, and then I invited somebody to bring their honeybees. And I mean, just you walk out the field and it was just amazing, just the sights and sounds. To me, that's rewarding to have something new, something different, and that in itself is a reward. And um, it's just fun to have a story to tell. And then on the direct marketing side, we do a little bit with beef. So I raise miniature cattle. I call them fun size steaks. And the rewarding part of that is just to have people really enjoy your product and to really just uh, just appreciate what you're doing. So many times with the commodity stuff, they kind of act like they're doing you a favor by taking off your hands for you, and but with the more direct marketing, it's just very rewarding because people appreciate it.
Do you find that the direct marketing, is that a lot of people right there? What would you say your radius is for your products with some of those things? Is it right there in the immediate area, or are you still kind of having to reach a little bit, have a bigger radius to get enough folks for your products?
Right now, the direct marketing the beef is just very new. So my challenge right now is just getting the beef package time for people. I don't really have to reach out much, but as it goes on, it grows. There's other guys that are doing it that are selling a lot out to the cities out on the Front Range, Denver area, which is about three, 3.5, 4 hours from us. And the market out there is wide open. I think there's just so many people that are looking to want to know where their food came from. So I do have a guy that comes out here and pheasant hunts, and he likes to buy our beef because he just wants to know where it came from. And he knows you know, he knows me, and that's the connection he likes. It's just kind of, and there again, you develop these friendships. Just a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is the joy. It requires a little bit of a different mentality, and again, there are challenges to it, to doing marketing. When I talk to farmers who are doing the local food thing, that's what they always say. It's marketing, and that's the biggest challenge. And most of them will say that's where I'm most behind on. So it is a challenge. But the reward is to actually have these wonderful connections with folks, and to actually get to know those who are taking your product home and putting it on their plate. That's really, really cool. Um, Trying to think what other direction we should go on this first interview. We're going on the second side. When we get into our second webinar, we're going to talk more about directly the actual the nuts and bolts, so to speak, of cover crops and that sort of thing. Let's maybe leave off with this. As a Christian, as someone who feels called to steward the land, um, how is your agriculture an expression of your Christian faith? How do you, and you touched on a little bit before, I'd just like to see you kind of expand a little bit more on this. Um, and you mentioned on you had planned to go to Africa and teach some of this stuff, and then with your church group, and then didn't end up going. Um, I maybe that kind of connects in with it too. How does your identity as a Christian therefore become a big part of how you do ag?
Well, I just really believe that as Christians, we should be the best at everything. Um, we have the ultimate landlord, and we should do our best for him. And we should do, I mean, our bodies aren't even our own, but we should do the best for our own bodies. And, we've really, and that's one of the things my wife and I really keyed on.
Well, I think we've lost Vance for a minute here. We'll see if he comes.
Serving
Oh,
God.
there he is. Okay.
Oh, what part did you miss?
Well, we lost you. You were talking about you and your wife, and I think how you've changed your eating habits and that sort of thing, or something like that. And then you were blank for a little bit.
Right. So, anyways, just taking care of our own bodies because they're not even our own. That
Mhm.
Christ paid a price and bought us, and that we're to serve Him. And I've seen it being unhealthy be a real hindrance to us to being able to serve, and so that was a so then that comes back to me that if I'm sending food out to people that's not healthy, it's that same deal of loving your neighbor. Well, why would I put something in someone else's mouth that I wouldn't put into mine? That kind of thing, I guess, is what what drives me, I guess, on the. But yes, I just it's all tied together because, like I said, if you're really biblical stewardship, that we don't own anything, that we're supposed to take care of it, manage it to the best of our ability.
Thanks be to God. We're going to take a little break here. We're going to key up the next webinar. We thank Vance for being a part of our conversation today. Please check out the next webinar. We'll be recording it here in moments, and then we'll be posting it up a couple of days after we post up this one. And we'll be talking more the nuts and bolts of cover cropping and how that is a blessing and a help for soil health and for healthy people, for healthy food. Vance, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation today.
Thank you.
This is Pastor Christopher Murundi of the Lutheran Institute of Regenerative Agriculture. Thank you so much, friends. Definitely check out our second video when it posts up. God's blessings.